Alright, everybody, I am back in my studio, and I just want to do this quick video on the main channel, just talking about my overall impressions of the Detroit draft, not in terms of the picks, not in terms of anything that any teams did. That'll go on JG9 News. We got a lot of content coming on JG9 News regarding the draft, but just in terms of how Detroit did as a host city, I've been fortunate enough to go to a lot of drafts. I've now been to 8 drafts in my life. Went to the 2012 and 2014 at Radio City when I lived in New York, and then went to Chicago in 2015, Nashville in 2019, and then every draft from 2021 on. So Cleveland, Vegas, KC, and Detroit. So I just want to get my overall thoughts on how Detroit did compared to other cities, what I liked, what I didn't like, the good and the bad, because they did a lot of stuff right. There were some stuff that we do need to talk about going forward in terms of the draft. Now, let's start with the good. Obviously, the fans showed out. Obviously, the fans were absolutely incredible. 775,000 people across all 3 days of the draft in Detroit, smashing the previous record held by Nashville around 600,000. Now, granted, Nashville, a bit of an asterisk next to that because the weather was terrible on night one of the draft. It was absolutely pouring, but Detroit came to play. 250,000 people across all 3 days. They actually hit capacity on day one. 2 hours before the draft, I got an alert on my phone saying that everything was closed, that they were not letting any more people into the draft because it was already at capacity. Detroit did an incredible job in terms of getting people to come. There was a huge sense of pride, too. I really got the feeling that every local person, every local business surrounding Detroit, they were asking how we did. They were talking about the reputation of Detroit, how it's got a bad rap over the last few years, and hopefully this would be the thing to turn the tide, which you could sense. You could sense there was a real sense of community pride with this Detroit draft, which I really, really liked. On top of that, obviously it was out of Detroit's control. The weather was surprisingly good. The weather, I have to give credit where credit's due. The weather was surprisingly incredible. Thursday was a bit on the colder side, but Friday held out really well. Saturday was 80 degrees and sunny. Usually with an outdoor draft, you have to go in under the assumption that one of the 3 days is absolutely going to stink from a weather perspective, that you're going to get rain, you're going to get not the best weather. Detroit, all 3 days, pretty good. Was pleasantly surprised by that, especially because the weather report when I flew into Detroit said, okay, Thursday might be okay, but Friday night and Saturday are going to be raining. It really only rained overnight. I want to say Friday to Saturday. It rained overnight, but that's totally fine, obviously, because the draft did not take place overnight. So it worked out. The weather actually worked out pretty well. The bar was on the ground with Cleveland. Cleveland 2021 was the worst because they put the draft on the water, and it was pouring. For most of the days, it was super cold. Saturday was the only exception, but it was absolutely terrible weather there. Detroit, I was pleasantly surprised by how good the weather was there. In terms of the logistics, NFL on location, we went through them. They did an amazing job. Unbelievable job. We're going to talk about the Detroit employees in a second, but the NFL employees, absolutely incredible. The red carpet, it was the first time that fans were allowed on the red carpet since 2019. Had a meet and greet with Calvin Johnson, hosted by Peter Schrager. That was incredible. Met a ton of legends. They offered a lot of stuff, which I really liked. NFL on Location did an amazing job this year. I have to give a shout out to all the employees that work directly for the NFL because they raised their game. They always do a good job, but this year in particular, this might have been the best year that they've done it. They put on a show. If you ever get a chance to go NFL on Location for this, do it. It is a ton of fun. They offer a ton. On top of that, the stage was incredible. This was probably the best draft stage yet. It was massive. I liked how the theater had a deep overhang. What the problem was, if you saw Nashville in 2018, the theater did not have a deep overhang, so you have the inner circle with the fans from the specific teams, and if you were not in that, if you were on the back end of that inner circle, you were getting hit with the elements. You were getting hit with the rain, the wind, and everything. They've expanded the overhang in the last few years where you are pretty much protected from the elements if you are inside the theater. Even the cold, to some extent, you are protected, which I really like. The stage was really, really cool. The green room was really, really nice this year. And the house band that they have, so every year since 2019, minus 2020, obviously, they've had a house band that plays in between the picks. People wonder, why would people go to the draft? There's nothing that's happening there. It's completely boring. Nothing happens at the draft in between the picks. You're just waiting. Well, not true. Ever since 2018, they added a house band that plays, and this house band was really, really good. A lot of talented vocalists, a lot of talented instrumentalists on there. They did a really good job. The best house band was Vegas. That was the Raiders band. So if you ever go to a Raiders game, you ever see the Raiders house band, that was the band in 2022. They were number one. This band might have been number two. They're up there with Casey. Casey was really good. This band was really good. They did a good job. They did a really good job. So there's a lot of stuff that I really, really liked about the Detroit draft. And in many ways, they did a very good job. In many ways, this was a successful draft. Obviously, the number that everyone's going to remember in the years going forward is 775,000 people. And there is no chance whatsoever that that record gets broken next year in Green Bay, because I think the city would collapse if 775,000 people show up in Green Bay over a 3-day period, because obviously hotel space is limited and the city is not big enough as it is. Even if every single person in Green Bay attended the draft all 3 days and you got an extra 300,000 people, you would still be well short. So it's not going to happen. Detroit's going to have that record at least for another year. Now, having said that, and I don't want to make this sound ungrateful or anything like that. Believe me, that's not my intention at all. There were some stuff that did not work well with this Detroit draft. There's some stuff that did not work. Some of it not Detroit's fault. Some of it was Detroit's fault. First off, in terms of the concerts, you need the concerts to be after the draft rounds are done. So they do these post-round, they do these draft concerts each night. So Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday, they do a concert. And usually the concert takes place after the round is concluded. So Saturday for round 3, they do it afterwards. Thursday, Friday, they do it afterwards. This year they did it before. Now, I can't blame Detroit for this. It's the problem with when you have a draft on the Eastern time zone. There's going to be curfew. Obviously, you cannot start a concert that ends after the draft at 11:30. The concert starts at 12. You're going to go past curfew. You obviously can't have a concert going until 1 in the morning, loud and in the middle of Detroit. You can't have that happening. So I get it. But you need the concerts after the draft going forward, because what happens is that the energy dies down a ton after the Lions make their pick. So there's no incentive for the fans to stay. Once the Lions made their pick, once they traded up, it emptied out like crazy. The theater emptied out, the crowd emptied out, everything emptied out, and the energy was just dead. You need the post-draft concerts after the draft, not before the draft like they had on Thursday and Friday, because it was the same problem at Radio City when the Jets and the Giants were there. And even the Bears when they had the theater in 2015, when they had rounds 1 and 2 in the theater. Once the Bears made their pick, once the Jets and Giants made their pick, it emptied out. Once the Lions made their pick, emptied out. There was no incentive for fans to stay because there was no post-draft concert. It happened before. The other part with a pre-round concert instead of post-round, it's very distracting to do it before. It is really, really distracting to do it before the draft instead of after the draft. Because what happens is that you have cameras going up and down the aisle getting crowd shots, people conducting interviews and whatnot, people getting to their seats, people taking photos. You have all these people from ESPN, NFL Network, and the NFL telling fans to do these crazy things while the concert's happening. So it's tough to really pay attention to the concert a whole lot, versus if it takes place after the draft, after the round, people are just there for the concert. So it feels more like a festive atmosphere. The concerts pre-draft, they don't really feel any different than a regular house band. And I think that is a problem that the NFL has to address going forward. I don't think the pre-draft concerts worked in that regard from an energy level after the draft, and even during the concert itself. During the concert itself and after the draft, I don't think it works. They need to do it. They need to do the draft concerts after the draft, like they've done in previous years. Again, I can't blame Detroit for this. I think this was just a curfew-related issue. Shouldn't be an issue in Green Bay when they're Central Time Zone, because it was an issue in Kansas City Central Time Zone. If the draft goes to Pittsburgh in 2026, which is the rumor, we'll see what they do there. Now, in terms of the layout of the draft, this was not a good layout. it was not a good layout. The layout was kind of rough. The draft experience was very, very far away from the stage. It felt completely disconnected from previous drafts. Like Vegas, you could see the draft experience when you entered. Kansas City, same thing. Detroit, it felt very disconnected from the actual theater. It was basically a mile away, and it was very much like Nashville, where it was completely out of the way. I'm not sure that worked to its advantage. On top of that, the city drafts, I think the NFL is going to get the wrong message from this Detroit draft and from Nashville in 2019. Because the top two drafts attendance-wise were Nashville and Detroit. And the common theme there is that they took place in the heart of the city. They closed down the city. They closed down the roads. Now, other drafts, Vegas, it was in a secluded area. Kansas City, they held it at a grass field, essentially. They held it at Union Station, and they held it essentially at a grass field in a park-like area. Cleveland, it was outside the stadium. They didn't close down any roads. It was also, Cleveland was different. Cleveland was reduced capacity because of COVID. We were just starting to get back to normal in 2021. Problem with the city draft, in Nashville, it wasn't a huge problem because Broadway is a straight street. So you knew with Broadway, you knew with Nashville that Broadway's going to be closed, everything else is going to be fine. Detroit, you didn't know what was closed. Detroit, you didn't know what was closed. The signs were not helpful at all. If you left and you wanted to get somewhere, it was impossible to navigate. It was absolutely impossible to navigate. There was one point in the draft, Friday morning, we had a meet and greet with Calvin Johnson, which was awesome, and Peter Schrager hosted, and it was great. But that took place outside the draft premises, and we wanted to get back to our hotel and do some stuff, relax before night 2. So you figure, okay, we can just cut straight across, go right down the middle. But we had to go all the way around the draft theater because just the layout was bad. And the GPS on your phone doesn't know what's closed due to pedestrians and whatnot. So it took 45 minutes just to get around. Not 45 minutes to get back, 45 minutes to get around. Because this takes us to my other thing. The NFL employees were super, super helpful. Detroit employees, the people hired by Detroit as volunteers or security or police or whatnot, this was the least helpful staff I have seen at a draft. And I don't know what the issue was there. I honestly don't know what the issue was there because no one knew what they were doing. And when you're holding an event and you have people at an event, there are certain things that every volunteer, every person that works needs to know. Certain questions that everyone needs to know. And I'm not talking like complex questions. I'm not talking about these crazy convoluted questions. I'm talking about basic questions like, the big one for me, how do you get out? That's a big one. How do you get out? How do you get somewhere? And no one knew the answer. No matter who we spoke to. No one knew the answer. We had people telling us to go one way, people telling us to go the other way. Someone told us to go, if you want to go around, you have to go 1.5 miles down the road. Someone said, no, you don't have to do that. You can just walk into the theater or walk into the NFL draft area. You just have to go through security. We had someone say, no, you go this way. No one knew. And then you had, because we were trying to cut across, and we are trying to exit the NFL thing, because we figured, okay, the best way to do it was to go into the NFL draft experience, go through there, and then try and cut across. Well, we asked people how to exit, and one person said you can exit out this way. And we got there, and it was blocked off. It said, no, you have to exit out this way. And then they were like, no, you have to exit out this way. And then security one of the nights, there was a left lane and a right lane. And one volunteer or one person working said, go to the right. Another person said, yeah, go to the right. And then we got to where NFL location was and said, no, you had to be on this line. So no one really knew what they were doing. And this, again, NFL people were great. The NFL people were great. But the people that work for the city, that worked as volunteers and whatnot, I honestly don't think there was a single helpful person there. No one really knew the answers to basic questions. And it wasn't just a me thing. I spoke to other people who were at the draft, and they had similar issues where they were being misguided and misled into different spots because the signage wasn't helpful and because the people weren't helpful and didn't really know what they were doing in terms of how to navigate the city, how to navigate this layout. At the very least, what I think you need to do, if you are going to do a city layout, if you are going to do a city draft where you block off a specific section of the city, not in a park, not a grass field, not in a secluded area, but if you're going to block off the entirety of downtown, you need to have a pedestrian bridge that is built so that there is an easy way to go across if you are outside the draft thing, so you're not going in circles, and especially people don't know where to direct you, because again, super unhelpful. The people in the people that were working in Detroit were super unhelpful, and that was really disappointing. They didn't really, again, everyone, you gotta know, like, just basic questions. I'm not asking people to know, like, okay, if I want to buy a helmet from this, where would I go? If I want to buy a specific thing, where would I go? I'm just talking basic stuff like, how do you get out? How do you get out? That should be like the number one thing, is how do you exit? Where is the exit? And the fact that no one knew the answer to that, or like security, what line do I enter? Basic stuff like that. And no one knew the answer to that. There was a severe lack of preparation on their part. I think the fans rose to the occasion with the draft. Obviously, 775,000 people showing up. A lot of pride around there. The city, I don't think, rose to the occasion of the draft. The fans did, and the NFL did. I don't think the city itself did. Obviously, the NFL is going to view this as a success because 250,000 people, they share the attendance record. But there were a lot of stuff that did not, it just did not function the way it did not run smoothly. I'll put it that way. There were many things that did not run smoothly, and there were a lot of worries that I had that I didn't have in other cities. Not from a safety perspective. I'm not talking about a safety perspective. Detroit felt very, very safe. I'm talking about, like, just logistically, in terms of road closures, in terms of exiting. It's like, this should not be hard. This should not be something I have to think about. This should just be something I do intuitively, having been to many drafts before, and I had to actually think about it here. And just the layout didn't work. The staff not super helpful, and that was kind of disappointing. But the NFL did a great job. The NFL and the stuff that they handled, their employees, and building the stage and hiring people and whatnot, they did a great job. I just don't think the layout worked. Now, Green Bay, the layout, it's going to be outside Lambeau Field. It's going to be at Titletown, so that'll be totally fine in terms of the layout. Again, just don't know how Green Bay is going to be able to host the draft because hotel space super limited and flying could be an absolute nightmare. People say Green Bay can't host the Super Bowl because it's too small of a city, and that is true, but keep in mind, people only go to the Super Bowl if they're buying a ticket to the Super Bowl, and that's 70,000 people. Draft, 10 times that. So I don't know how they're going to do that, but I'm looking forward to Green Bay in 2025 if I'm able to go, which hopefully we'll be able to do that. But yeah, that's my final impressions on the draft in Detroit. Overall, in terms of where I rank this draft, in terms of the drafts I've been to, from a traveling perspective, from 2015 on, again, did not go in 2016 to Chicago, did not go in 2017 to Philly, did not go in 2018 to Arlington. But in terms of where I would rate this, I mean, Vegas is number one, because, I mean, Vegas is Vegas. The bar is Vegas. I mean, Vegas was great. Nashville was great. Cleveland, I put at the bottom, but I can't really fault Cleveland for that. They got crappy weather, and it was also COVID logistics. Remember, that was April 2021. We were just starting to get back to the swing of things, so there were some restrictions in place. I'd probably put this one just above Cleveland. Worse than KC, worse than Vegas. I'd put it just above Cleveland just in terms of the experience. Again, it's not a knock on... It's mainly a knock on the layout and the employees at Detroit, the volunteers, and the people that were hired by Detroit, not the NFL. The NFL location, this was number one. In terms of what NFL location provided, and in terms of their stuff, this was number one. I just don't think the city rose to the occasion the way I would have liked. But obviously the fans did, and the NFL did. I just wish the city was a bit better prepared. Even with the airport. Even when it came to the airport, it took 20 minutes to wait for a taxi. Usually and I came the day before the draft, usually taxis are there, like, you don't have to think about it. Taxis are just lined up outside. I had to wait 20 minutes for one, and there was no line, there was no queue, there was no nothing. It was a free-for-all. It was essentially a free-for-all. And even leaving, there was one person working the baggage, which you would think 775,000 people at the draft. There'd be more than one person working baggage. Again, I just don't think the city rose to the occasion, but the fans did, and the NFL did. And again, it was a solid draft. I don't want this to sound super negative, because I had a great time at the draft, as I always do, and they did a good job just comparing it to other things, and there were some logistical things that just didn't work out the way I would have liked. But Detroit, obviously, they're going to be in the running for future drafts because of the attendance they got, and because it did go relatively well compared to what... It did go well if you look at the numbers. And look, if you were at the draft and your experience was different, please let me know. If you were at the draft, please let me know. I want to know what your thoughts are on how the draft went. From a logistics standpoint, the good, the bad, the ugly. Let me know all your thoughts down below in terms of how you think this draft went. Because I would love to know. I'd love to know if my experience was unique, if my experience was different, if it was just a complete anomaly in terms of what worked and what didn't. I have the experience of being at a lot of drafts in the past. For a lot of you, this might be your first draft if you went there. So you might not have noticed these things or might not have had any issue with these things. So again, it might just be me. It might just be me and my standards and my expectations. But let me know your thoughts down below if you were at this draft, what you thought, just my overall impressions. And yeah, any future videos on the draft in terms of the picks, in terms of the players, in terms of trades, in terms of anything like that, that's going to go on JG9 News. This is the last vlog type video on JG9, at least for the foreseeable future. 2025 draft, we'll do some stuff like this. And if some other crazy stuff happens, we'll do otherwise, we're just going to go on JG9 News, because obviously this is not like the content I usually put out on this channel. It's usually all history-based and edited, highly edited, not one take, not just me rambling in front of a camera with no script. So, again, thank you guys for being with me for the draft. If you watched the vlogs on all 3 days, really, really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Hopefully you got to see some cool stuff behind the scenes. Hopefully you got to see a lot of what I do during the draft, a lot of behind the scenes stuff, all the work I put in. It was a fun time, and thank you guys for making this all possible, and thank you guys for being there with me every step of the way, and especially during this draft. I will see you guys soon. We got history videos coming up. The next video is going to be something from 1972. I got some really cool membership videos as well coming up. Giants Cards documentary from 1983 that is in the works right now. And that's going to be a fun video. You won't want to miss that when that comes out. So thank you guys again for tuning in. I'll see you guys soon.